I'd like to welcome Kate Rope and tell you how delighted that we are that you're here. Kate Rope is an award-winning freelance journalist whose work has appeared in many publications and online outlets, including the New York Times, Real Simple, CNN.com, Shape, Glamour UK, Baby Center, Parade, and Parenting. She's the author of Strong as a Mother, How to Be Happy, Healthy, and most importantly, Sane, from Pregnancy to Parenthood, the only guide to taking care of you, among other books that you've written. Kate serves on the advisory board of the Salani Institute and as an advisor of the Georgia chapter of Postpartum Support International. She lives in Atlanta with her husband and 2 daughters. So, welcome, Kate. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, I am really impressed with how comprehensive a book this is, from the very beginning through of pregnancy through parenting. There's so much incredible information in it. What led you to write this book?
Well, I had a difficult first pregnancy with my older daughter, and then I had postpartum anxiety after both of my births, and so when I was pregnant and when I was experiencing postpartum anxiety, I would read the parenting books, and I felt like none of them my experience. I wanted a book that talked about all of it, because I felt sort of alienated. I felt like a freak. I felt like, oh, nobody's having as hard a time as I am, which I now know to be completely not true. So I just wanted to write a book that talked about all of the experience, open it and find somewhere in it their story and someone who's been through something like what they've been through, so they would feel empowered to get help, and they would know they're not alone, and that they aren't a freak.
Could you tell me some of the things that you were experiencing, and had you experienced these things before you got pregnant?
So in my first pregnancy, I had a very odd thing happen, and I always tell people, don't Google it. It's not a normal pregnancy thing. But I had just inflammation around my heart, which is often associated with an autoimmune condition. They didn't know why I was having it. It's not a dangerous condition in and of itself, but it's very painful, and they were sort of continuously testing me and doing things like giving me CT scans, or at one point I had a radionucleotide shot into my blood, and I had to go get scanned behind this metal door that had a nuclear fallout shelter sign on it. So I was doing all these things, and you're told never to even get an x-ray during pregnancy. So that was during my pregnancy. It just ended up that I had, for some unknown reason, pregnancy triggered my body to produce inflammation around my heart. I'd had one episode before pregnancy, and pregnancy probably just triggered a recurrence, and it was just treated with anti-inflammatories and then steroids. And slowly it's gotten better over the years. I had some with my second pregnancy, but I felt so guilty for the drugs that I had taken, because, I was reading books that said, don't even take a Tylenol if you have a headache. And here I was taking steroids every day, taking ibuprofen every day. So that was the first thing. And then the postpartum anxiety, I think, stemmed from that. I think I've always had a fair amount of anxiety, and a lot of the mental health experts I've talked to will say that women who experience a postpartum mood disorder often may have had it a little bit before, but it didn't get as intense as it did in the postpartum period. So for me, I think having a medically difficult pregnancy and constantly needing to be tested and monitored just ramped up my anxiety. And then in the postpartum period, with my hormones in flux, it really flared.
And what does that feel like?
For me,
like, how do you describe anxiety postpartum?
For me, so I think it can feel different for different women. But one thing that I have experienced that a lot of women have said, oh yes, that's what I felt, is sort of racing thoughts. Feeling like your brain is a continual cycle of racing worries about things, and it feels exhausting. It feels like you can't take a break from your thoughts and your concerns. I didn't have this symptom, but I always like to get it out there that another symptom of postpartum mood disorders or anxiety disorders is rage or anger. So I think a lot of women don't know that what they're feeling is a diagnosable disorder because it doesn't look like postpartum depression, because they don't, they're active, they're up, they're taking care of a new baby, they're not sleeping, they don't look like sort of a sad woman like on the hospital pamphlet staring out the window. They feel energized by their worry. So and some of that energy can be rage. So a lot of women will say, well, it didn't look like postpartum depression, so I didn't think that I needed help.
So that's the hard part, is that it appears different ways in different women. How did you get help? Where did you turn to, and what did it look like for you?
So I started seeing a psychotherapist in my first pregnancy when I was having the medical problems to kind of manage my anxiety then. And I was still with her in the postpartum period. So I was going to therapy. But even still, I cycled into some pretty severe postpartum anxiety, even though I was meeting with someone every week and talking about it. So eventually at about 9 months, she and I decided that I might need medication to return to normal functioning. And I went to a reproductive psychiatrist, and that's a growing field of professionals who are comfortable prescribing during pregnancy, in the postpartum period, during breastfeeding. If you're breastfeeding, they know about the interactions of these medications with hormones and with a developing baby or a breastfeeding baby. So I went to her, and she prescribed an antidepressant, which also works well as an anti-anxiety drug, sertraline or Zoloft. And within 2 weeks of starting it, I felt like my old self, my old self, and realized that I had been living with a lot of anxiety and didn't even realize how it was affecting my life, let alone the postpartum anxiety, but just even prior to that. So for me, my recovery, once I recognized that I needed medication, was rapid. And then I continued to work on my anxiety in psychotherapy. I still work on my anxiety. But for me, the medication calmed my brain enough to think clearly and think through the anxiety and learn coping techniques.
Could you explain how anxiety and depression are related? Some of these drugs work with anxiety, are meant, like you said, the anxiety drug helps with depression. How are they interrelated?
So that's a complicated question. I'm going to start by saying that what most people think of as postpartum depression, what we used to call postpartum depression, is now understood by experts in the field to be a range of disorders called perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And they can include depression, anxiety, generalized anxiety, OCD, panic disorder, and postpartum stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which you can have in the postpartum period. And it's also understood that these things can develop during pregnancy and after. In fact, 50% of women who go on to experience a mood disorder or anxiety disorder after pregnancy had it during pregnancy. So now I'll get to the answer of your question, which is that some experts think that postpartum anxiety is depression with just a lot of anxiety symptoms, and some experts view it as it's either depression or it's anxiety. So I think the field is evolving. So some people would have what's called postpartum anxiety, but someone might say, well, that's depression just with anxiety features. But for me, I really didn't have any of the classic symptoms of depression. And for me, I really had all the symptoms of an anxiety disorder.
Do you feel like, first of all, for you to speak up, write this book, and share your story, it allows other people to come forward and feel comfortable sharing theirs. Do you feel as a whole that I feel like we're hearing about this? There's so many people who face anxiety and depression. I feel as a whole, more people in general seem to be coming forward and sharing. Do you find that? And do you, and I loved some of the statements in your book about um, it, I mean, you think you're not alone. You're not, we think we're alone in our struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at we look at normal as we define normal. But I think this is so common
Mm-hmm.
that, did you feel comfortable sharing it, and did you feel supported? And how can we make people feel more comfortable to talk about what they're experiencing, so that they don't live with this alone and they realize that they're not alone?
Yeah. Well, that's my whole goal with writing the book. That's my whole goal with talking about this. For me, it's been completely positive from the first article I wrote in 2008 on my postpartum anxiety, through to publishing this book. I've just been, I mean, I'm a pretty open person, so it wasn't a huge risk, but it was scary to talk about it. I was more scared 8 years ago to say I've taken antidepressants publicly than I am now. So I think that's part of my evolution, but it's also part of the evolution of the conversation that we're having. And I do think that it's really changed the way that I feel like we've made tremendous progress, and then I sometimes feel like we haven't made any progress, because I feel like the conversation that I'm seeing is more knowledgeable and more accepting. But then I feel like sometimes I'll talk to a woman who just will break down when she hears me describe her symptoms, because she says, no one gets it. No one's been talking about this. And so sometimes I feel like we're really making strides, and then sometimes I feel like we aren't at all. And it's sometimes hard for me to know, because I live in this world. This is what I'm thinking about and talking about and writing about. And I also think it's really community specific too, that there are some, groups where mental health is kind of breaking open and people are talking about it more honestly and openly, and they're comfortable with it. And then there's a lot of groups or cultures where it's still something that really is taboo and difficult to broach. So that was one of my main things in my book, was to talk about, if you are experiencing a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder, how do you talk about it with people who may not know at all what it is, who may not even understand the importance of mental health. So one of the things I talk about is that if you live in a community where the good of the community is valued over, if you're in your culture, the good of the community is valued over the individual's pursuit of happiness, say, then you can make this a community argument. If I'm treated, my kids do better, my family does better, my community does better. And so this is really, or if your community really values parenting, this is really something I'm doing to be a better parent. I mean, I believe that women, everyone, but I'm writing for women, have the right to feel good just so that they feel good and strong and healthy. But there's reasons to do it for your kids and your family. And you can, those are the arguments you need to make to convince the people in your life to help you, then use those arguments. I try to come at it in different ways, understand if someone seems shut off from the conversation, well, are they afraid of something? Can you try to figure out what they're afraid of, why they're scared? I mean, if you're experiencing a mood disorder, you're probably scared to say it out loud. So they're scared too, to face it. So how can you help them feel more comfortable? Sometimes making it really medical. This is a medical complication of pregnancy and early motherhood, and 20% of moms experience it. I think I am, and there are treatments for it. If you live in a family or with people or a community that is really against medication, then you can emphasize that psychotherapy and support groups and acupuncture and other modalities are also validated treatments for this, and you can begin the conversation there, so they're not automatically thinking, oh, you're just going to go get, whatever their preconceived notions about using medications are. I really want to equip women with concrete ways to start the conversation.
You had two things that you mentioned in your book that I thought, two statements I just want to repeat. You said depression has been under-recognized in pregnant women. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that really I thought was was a great statement is, it is nothing to be ashamed of, and it is in no way a reflection of how much you love your baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I thought those statements were really important to say.
Yeah.
You mentioned coping methods like psychotherapy. What else could help? So getting the right treatment and medications. What else could we do? Are there breathing exercises that you found helpful? What else helps you cope when you're a new mom, you're filled with all kinds of fears and anxieties? Are there statements that you tell yourself? Are there other coping methods that you've used that you found have worked?
Well, the most important is protecting your sleep. Sleep deprivation is a precursor to anxiety, whether or not you're experiencing a disorder. And so obviously there's a lot of sleep deprivation in early motherhood. And what they've shown is that getting 2 to 3 hour ideally chunks of sleep can improve, your brain's functioning and can lessen your chance of being at risk for a mood disorder. So, and maybe you need more than that, but really paying attention to your sleep. If you have a co-parent, setting up a system where you switch off nights of being responsible for wakings, or you switch off waking so that you can get maybe a 3 to 5 hour stretch of sleep, and your brain can go through all the cycles and complete a cycle and be more rested. So sleep is the first thing to tackle. And I was intimidated to write that chapter, because how on earth are they going to get more sleep? Because everyone just take it for granted. But no, we have to say, actually, sleep is the foundation for everything. And we need to look at what we're doing and look at who our baby is and come up with a way that primary parents can get, good solid chunks of sleep. So I'd start there. The next thing I would do, and this is of course separate from treatment, but the things that you can do in your home, on your own for yourself. Exercise has been really proven by research to stabilize mood, lower risk for mood disorders. So, and it really depends on what kind of recovery you're having, what kind of delivery you had, but moving in whatever way you can consistently in the beginning, and just slowly building up. And one tip that came from this, from one of the women, one of the experts I interviewed, which I thought was great, was write down how you feel before you exercise, whatever it is. If it's walking to the mailbox, if it's walking around the block, if it's going to a spin class because you're 8 weeks in and you're pretty recovered, whatever it is, before you do it, write down, rate your mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And then afterwards, rate your mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And then maybe even later in the day, at the end of that day, on a day that you exercise and then on a day you don't exercise, just, give yourself a rating. And you'll quickly see the connection between moving your body, often getting outside, and your mood. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is having support, is having people around you with whom you can talk about what you're going through and feel supported. So that might be finding a mom's group, taking your baby out to a local coffee shop or a bookstore or wherever moms are gathering. Sometimes baby stores in your neighborhood will group people according to birth date. The hospital where you delivered, or birthing center might have something. But finding a group of people with whom you feel comfortable, and that's important, to just share what you're going through and realize that you're not alone.
Okay. And nowadays there's things like Meetup too.
Oh, Meetups are great. Yep. And you could put in there, going back to work moms, or stay-at-home moms, or Black moms, like whatever group you want to find that's close to your experience, you can find through there kind of specifically, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. How do we also cope with mom guilt, whatever it's over, if it's real or not real? You want to, in so many cases, we hold ourselves to this idea of perfection that I don't know if we could live up to.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with those types of feelings that could keep you down that, like Johnson Johnson had a commercial out at one point. It said, "Mom, you're doing great."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you just this message, and it happened to run when my daughter was young, and I used to hear that commercial like, "Thank you, Johnson Johnson." You need that positive reinforcement. Like, am I doing well? I'm a first-time mom, and your expectations. So how do we keep our expectations real and tell ourselves you're doing good, and cope with whatever feelings of that we're maybe not reaching to our ideals because maybe they're not practical. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's a big part of my book too. And I think we put really unreasonable expectations on moms in our society and on ourselves, because we're also living in this society. So I think that one of the first things is changing your expectations, lowering your expectations. I think that, we expect so much from moms, but really our society doesn't put a lot of supports in place for moms. There isn't good parental leave. There isn't a national visiting nurse service that comes to your home, after you've given birth, like they have in the UK. So, a lot of us live far away from our families. We don't have that extended family structure there. So we're putting all these expectations on ourselves, but we don't have the supports. And so then something falls through the cracks, whatever it is. And, you miss your kid's recital, or you show up to the soccer game without the shin guards, or, whatever, or bigger things. And you view it as a personal failure, instead of understanding that what's being expected is unreasonable, and there's no way you could possibly meet all these expectations. And then in addition to that, it's actually okay and good for your kids to not do everything for them, to let them learn resilience, to let them have some independence. So I don't know how you get rid of mom guilt. I honestly, I debated having a chapter on it, and I just thought, I'm not sure how you do that. I think it's human nature a little bit. And, but I think what you can do is, a lot of times guilt comes in when you are measuring yourself against, if the guilt comes in because you sort of think this is a reasonable thing I'd like to do and I fell short, okay, then maybe figure out how you can change that next time. But a lot of time guilt comes in because we think other people, and we're applying other people's standards to our own life. And then when we don't meet them, being disappointed. But do we really want to apply those standards? What do we care about? What's most important for us? And you may have to kind of remind yourself of that again and again, because you're around other parents and other moms, and you're all the time being sent messages about what motherhood should be or what you should be doing. And I just think it's really important to say, well, what's most important to me, and then focusing on that, because you can only do so much, and you only should do so much.
Right. You also said a few things. You said that a lot of times our families are not around. I think that's a big thing today that we didn't face as much in past generations, is that our society, we're so spread out that we don't have the support we need. So finding that support is really critical in every way, I think. In the book, you talk about bonding with our baby. What are some of the ways that you've found for effective ways for parents to bond with their babies?
Well, the first thing I was surprised by, when I wrote that chapter, I had an expert in mind that I wanted to interview, Dana Rosenblum, who's a parenting coach in New York. And I knew that she and I had conversations in the past about how it isn't just a switch that gets flipped when you have a kid, that you automatically bond to your child, that it's a process, and it can be instant and it can take time, and neither one is right or wrong or normal or abnormal. It's all normal. So I knew that much, but I was surprised. The first thing she said to me is, do things with your baby that you enjoy. So if you like to watch Law and Order, then have your baby in the little bouncy seat next to you while you watch an episode of Law and Order. If you like to be by the water, take your baby in the stroller and go sit by the water. That bonding comes when you feel good and comfortable. And so do things that you enjoy. And babies aren't too picky about what the activity is, provided it's safe and the right temperature, I guess. So bring them with you to the things you like to enjoy, or do some things, maybe reading next to them, letting them sit on the the little gym with the things in the air that they look at, and let your child sit there and you read a book. That's the first step. And also just being with your child and slowly learning them, and they're learning you. I mean, you're both new to each other. It's the beginning of a relationship. So just watching your child, just observing, so that she's doing that, that means that. And I think those are two of the, that's really, those are the two things. Just, be with your baby and try to do things that you enjoy, and take breaks, so that when you come back, you're excited to spend time with your baby.
That's right. Can you talk about the Salani Institute that you're involved with, who they are and what they do?
So the Salani Institute is a wellness center and nonprofit organization on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They have a psychotherapy clinic, which also offers support groups and lactation support to women and families, individuals who are trying to become parents, and those who have become parents. And they touch on the big issues that affect your mental life at this time of your life. So infertility, miscarriage, child loss, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, parenting adjustment and support, career coaching. So they have a group of fantastic therapists who provide one-on-one therapy or couples counseling or lead support groups for all those topics. And then Salani also works as a nonprofit to lower stigma related to emotional health and advance policies that support emotional wellness for families. And they also, there's also one more huge thing they do, which is amazing, which is they train mental health care professionals in these specific perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and grief and loss around parenting. And they also train healthcare professionals on screening. So they work with OBs and pediatricians and doulas and midwives to talk about screening for mood disorders during and after pregnancy. And then they also work specifically with mental health professionals on research-based, evidence-based treatments for those conditions, because surprisingly, there's no specialty in the current institutions that offer advanced degrees in psychotherapy or counseling or social work specific to maternal and reproductive mental health. So they provide that.
Yeah. Could you say their website if people want information?
Yeah, it's www.salani.org, O-R-G. And Salani is spelled S like Sam, E like elephant, L like lion, E like elephant, N like Nancy, I like Isaac. Salani.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Now, how old are your kids now?
10 and 6.
10 and 6. And could you talk about, so as we move forward in parenting, what a big message of your book, and it's something that touched me, is to focus on ourselves too, mm-hmm. that we are the most important people in our lives ultimately. And I think and it's just like that old saying about on an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
If we take care of ourselves, we could more effectively take care of others. And you talked about, even when you were writing your book, asking your editor to extend the deadline.
Mm-hmm. By a year.
Because because you didn't want to go against what you were preaching, mm-hmm. to not put the pressure on yourself, right?
Yeah.
So many times as people, and I think especially as women, we're afraid to ask or state what we need, mm-hmm. or accept help from others, or admit that we need help from others. What would you say to that? And what would you say to women in general to help us as women take care of ourselves, and that it's okay to do so?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would say is something that you touched on, and I interviewed a a life coach who focuses on parenting, Graham Seabrook, who's in South Carolina. And she said, you're the only person who's been with you since birth and will be with you until you die. And, your kids will grow up and move away. If you're in a relationship, you want that relationship to last your whole life, but things happen, but you know that you will be there till the end. So you're the most important person. And that really struck me. I hadn't thought about it that way. You're also the only one who can do it. You're the only one who can fully care for yourself. So it is part of your job to start there. And that's part of everyone's job on the planet. But to speak to your point about parenting, I mean, the oxygen mask metaphor is way overused, but that's because it's so good. It's, like you need to give yourself oxygen in order to do the complicated task of, in an emergency, helping another person put safety equipment on, And so I think it's apt, and it's really easy to forget to do. And it's really easy to think that as a mother, your first job is just to sacrifice and care for everyone else. But if you can say, no, part of my job is taking care of myself so that I have the bandwidth and the patience and everything to take care of others, then it's going to be easier. And I think what I did push my deadline by a year. And one of the reasons I did that was that I had found this fitness camp that I go to every day because I absolutely love it. And I'd never had a workout experience like that. And that has taught me a deeper way to take care of myself. I also think self-care has gotten thrown around so much, and it's like mani-pedis or, drinks with your girlfriends. And not that there isn't a place for those things, but I think real self-care is learning what you need. If you're an introvert, then it's learning that for an hour a day, you need to, be in your room. And if that means putting your kids in front of the TV so you have quiet and don't have to think and interact with another human because that's tiring for you, then it's doing that. If it's, in my case, I discovered that my mental health is just immeasurably improved by daily exercise. So then it's realizing that, it's not a question of, oh, do I have time for that? It's no, I'm going to figure out how I work it in, and I'm going to make a commitment to do that consistently. So I think it's about thinking about self-care in a bigger way. Do you have a hobby you're neglecting? Do you love to dance? Do you love to sing? Do you love to do karaoke? Whatever it is, figuring out what have you done in your life that has made you feel really centered, and returning to that and making that a priority.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a daughter who's 7, and motherhood, I've learned so much about motherhood, a lot of things I didn't expect. And also I feel like it does, everyone says it goes very fast, and it does, and it evolves, and your role keeps changing, I feel. Mm-hmm. So from something you said before, one of the first things that surprised me so much about motherhood had to do with sleep, that I didn't realize my whole life it was a norm that you go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning. And suddenly when you have a baby, you could lay the baby down and you don't know if you're sleeping 45 minutes, if you're sleeping 5 minutes, or if you're going to sleep 3 hours. You have to be up when the baby's up. So that was a huge learning lesson and kind of like a shock. I wasn't prepared for it mentally, but I love the idea of you saying, balance it out and take turns with your significant other and that type of thing, which is really important. The other thing is, as my daughter...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. And if you're a solo mom, for the sleep thing, because again, this is so critical, instead of a gift registry, ask for donations to a night nurse fund or to the babysitting fund, or, getting friends to help. If you're parenting solo, getting creative about ways to afford help and ways to make sure you have consistent help from your peer group or your family.
That's a great point. And then now that my daughter's 7, I realize as your child gets older, they start to form their own relationships and friendships, and you get a little more time. And I had moved my whole life so that I was working from home. She got older, not that she's old, but by the age of 7 now, she'll come home from school and want to have play dates. So I learned to go with your gut. You know, you're ever evolving in life and learning, whether it's parenting or lifestyle or anything else. And so I want to, I want to give her that freedom. She has to develop her own relationships, but then I'm sitting home waiting for her to come home just to drive her to a friend's house and go back to sitting at home.
Right.
So I actually went through depression last year because I realized that certain things that were important to me, I had given up.
Mm.
And I didn't know if I could get them back. And a lot had to do with my work and professionally and a job that was very meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've taken steps to make that happen again. And now I'm back in a role that I love, and it's helped a lot. But I realized that also, and people say from the time your child is born, you're also preparing for when that child leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like having whatever it is that's important for you in your life, without maybe we have to let go of it for a period of time, but bringing that back into our lives. So with that, could you just say something about work-life balance and how anything that you've found to help people to make that balance easier to keep or regain, either re-enter the workforce, or if you've never left the workforce, how to balance parenting and work. So I think it's a hard thing, but, and I don't know an easy answer for that.
Yeah. Well, my first response is I don't really think there's such a thing as work-life balance. That there just isn't balance. There's just figuring out what you need to get done and prioritizing. And I think that I think it's really hard for families. I'm a writer, so I work from home and I have flexibility in my schedule. But for families where there's an office job, both parents are going to an office job 9 to 5, I think it's incredibly hard to balance that with parenting. And I think we need to do more to make that an easier thing to do, like subsidized childcare. But I think that I do think things come in seasons, so that if I'm starting to feel a little bit of the independence you're talking about, because I have a 6 and a 10-year-old, and so I'm starting to pick up and put more into the writing area. And I think knowing that you can go back to things, knowing that, just because you've left something for a period of time doesn't mean that you won't have it again. I interviewed a stay-at-home mom this weekend, and she said that she basically gave up her career for a period of time to raise her kids, and then she'll go back to it, and she said, sometimes if I think about that, that feels very intimidating, but I also know I'll be in a different place when it's time for that to happen. And I think that's important for anything related to parenting: sleep, your relationship with your partner, sex. I mean, just, you go through seasons and things can be that, we can read the newspaper on the weekend if we want to, because our kids play with each other, and that was out for many years. So I think knowing that things are seasons, and doing what you can to keep the flame burning for whatever that is, whether it's your relationship with your partner or your career, if you're taking a little bit of a break, or taking, or shifting the shape of your career in order to parent, just knowing that, just kind of keep things on a low flame so that you can bring them back to a boil when you're ready.
That's great advice. And the last aspect I want to touch on is other relationships. So when a child is born, they're so dependent on you. They're, everything focuses on them. But what could we do what have you found works to keep relationships with significant others healthy, to keep our friendships healthy? Are there any tips you have in that regard?
I think that's an area where I could always improve. I think the hardest is if you have a partner, and when you're in the early trenches of parenting, I can remember looking at my husband in the eye and thinking, oh my gosh, when was the last time I looked him in the eye? Because we're always looking down and, putting socks on people and cooking, and we're not just sitting and, engaging in conversation. So for us, for what I do is we just try to maintain a sense of humor and the good times around parenting. We know that it's not going to revolve around our relationship right now. But if we can enjoy each other in the things that we're doing side by side, like slowly we are looking at each other more and coming back to it. So again, kind of keeping that low flame. So that's one. And then friendships, I feel like just making a commitment to reach out to friends when you can. And, if that's something that feeds you, but we do know that social support is an incredible, balm for mood disorders and other kinds of mental health issues, that having social support can really ameliorate them or even lower your risk for them. So I think that throughout motherhood, prioritizing having friends around you that you feel supported by is really important.
That is. So to wrap it up, do you want to say a few key messages that you'd like people to take away and what you hope they gain from reading the book? And could you also hold your book up so people know what it looks like?
Yeah.
And they know what to look for in the bookstore, on Amazon, or everywhere books are available.
So this is it, Strong as a Mother, comes out May 1st. And my message is just that we're all humans and we're all going to have different experiences, and one is not better than another. And struggle is imperative for change. You can't change if you don't have struggle. And I think that I don't think it's a bad word. I just think I think becoming a mom is a transformation. It's a metamorphosis, and you're going to struggle. It's not if you will struggle. There will be struggles. The question is, what are they, and what kind of help do you need for them? So, don't be afraid to ask for help, to reach out, and get whatever it is you need to feel better, because you deserve it. You deserve to have whatever you need to feel strong as a mother.
That's great. Kate, I really am so impressed by this book. I know it'll touch so many lives. It is the book that I think every mother needs to read.
Oh, thank
you. It is so comprehensive. It doesn't just it talks about so many different aspects of our lives, so relatable. It gives you permission to be honest with what you're going through, honest with what you're feeling. And I really applaud you for writing it.
Thanks.
And I know that many people will benefit from reading this.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak today, and thank you for taking all this time, putting your heart and soul into everything you did to make this book a reality.
Thank you. It's my third baby.
Wow. It is, I'm sure. All right. Thank you. And to those joining us, thank you for logging on. We'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much. Take care.